I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jonathan Hoover to you. Jonathan's the senior associate pastor at New Spring Church in Wichita, Kansas. He's also an organizational psychologist and has served couples for 15 years as a marriage coach. Jonathan shepherds graduate students in his role as an assistant professor and director of the Master of Science in General Psychology program at Regent University. Jonathan's written about burnout in his 2024 book, Stress Fracture, Your Ultimate Guide to Beating Burnout, which follows his Fight Proof Your Marriage, a simple guide to help you stop fighting and start getting somewhere. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my joy to join you on the show. Thank you so much.
Well, I love it. I was so intrigued by your book. It was so interesting. And you called burnout a warning, and you used kind of an analogy of an overdrawn bank account. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, well, in order to understand burnout, the main principle that you have to hold on to is that we have a finite amount of energy. Every human being has a finite amount of energy for the different things that the different tasks and stresses that we engage in life. God gives us energy to take those on, but it's not an unlimited resource. And so much like money in a bank account, so long as you write checks that the money's there to cover, life is fine. And you might think you could just keep writing checks. And I mean, I told you this before. I had a friend in college whose parents put money in a bank account for him to spend from. And he would just write checks, assuming the money would be there. Mom and dad keep depositing money in the account. But one day he wrote a check that was too big and it bounced and he was shocked. It was like, how could there not be money? And I think that's what happens with burnout. We just assume there's going to be energy. So far that's been the case. Life is harder. New stresses come our way. I'll just be able to write a new check for that, whatever it is, because it's always been in the account. But there will come that time for all of us where we'll write a check that's just too big and it will bounce. And that's really what burnout is all about. We thought we would have energy to just keep going or to push harder. And then we go to that bank account and there's not enough funds to cover the check we've written. And then we kind of experience that crisis that burnout is all about.
What does that look like when I know you talked about crash wasn't the word. You talked about when things fall. We were talking about the crash of the collapse.
Collapse. It is. And burnout is a collapse. It's a emotional and physical, and I think also spiritual collapse. It is a breakdown. That's why our grandparents used to love to use the term nervous breakdown. Now, the nervous part of that, it doesn't quite work. They used to think that people had a breakdown because their nerves were weak. That's why we called it a nervous breakdown. And that's also why we don't use that term anymore. But the breakdown term, now that's a good term. We probably got rid of that too soon. Because what we're saying is just what was functioning isn't functioning now. And so what was functioning physically is not functioning as well. What was functioning emotionally is not functioning as well. And burnout will do that. And just because once you exhaust the energy that you have, those life stresses still keep coming at you, but you don't have anything to feed those stresses. And I think that's why it happens. And what does it look like? It looks like fatigue, powerful fatigue. So, and even to the extent of what we would call exhaustion. For me, I think of a scale that goes from tired to fatigued to exhausted. Tired is normal. Tired is God's way of telling us to rest. We all get tired. I had a long day at work today. You come home, oh, I'm tired. That's normal. Nothing wrong with that. That's God telling us time to rest. Just as when that light comes on your dash and says low fuel, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just telling you go refuel. Fatigue is kind of when we're starting to try to drive on a 30-second of a tank. And we're kind of like, I know the light's been on a while, but I'm still functioning. To me, that's what fatigue is. Fatigue is I'm still functioning, but I know better. And then exhaustion is I'm not functioning anymore, right? So that's when the tank is empty. And so I work with a lot of people that are either at the fatigue spot or they're at the exhaustion spot. But what that looks like is just, man, I don't have anything to give anybody. My relationships feel flat. When I pray, I feel like that feels flat. I don't feel like I'm reaching God, and I feel like I'm not hearing from God. And I feel disconnected from the people I love. And I feel kind of stuck at work. And I don't find joy in things. And I'm just not me. I don't feel like me anymore. And that's what you hear when somebody's really going through burnout. And it's sad. If somebody you love is going through burnout and you hear them say those kinds of things, it's disturbing. What is wrong with them? but it is that breakdown. There's literally just kind of some dysfunction that's come from just trying to work too hard. We've written that check that's now bounced, and we're in a little bit of trouble.
You give an example in your book about a young man you met on the airplane,
Mhm.
and you developed kind of a scale to help people evaluate what's going on. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, it's funny how before we hit the record button, we've talked about how God just gives you the right word in the right moment sometimes.
Yeah.
And I was on this flight and I was exhausted, honestly, but ended up talking to this young software exec who was so burnout. And I was trying to think of how to provide some coaching and to help. This has been so many years ago now, and I took out an American Airlines napkin. I still have it, and I took it out and I wrote PERSON on it. And I said, you're not just a software exec, you're a person. And I said, that means that there are a lot of domains that matter in your life, areas where you need results. And we can't just look at, because I had tried to tell him, I think you're burned out. He said, I'm not burned out because I'm doing great at work. And a lot of people think that burnout's just about work. And I said, but you're not just a worker. There's other parts of your life. So we took that person word and split it out into this, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual, occupational, and navigational, which is about where you're headed in life, how you feel about that, and whether you're happy with it. And we scored those 1 to 10. So how was he doing physically? 1 to 10, not so good. How was he doing emotionally? 1 to 10, not very good. Relationally, struggling, right? Spiritually, haven't felt like I've connected with God in a long time. Occupationally, though, 9, doing great at work. Navigationally, maybe not so much. And so what we did is we added those together. I'm a statistician. This is what I do. We added those together and averaged them. And his average was 3 something, I think.
That's
And I
not
called, it's
good.
bad. It's bad. And I call that your gross personal product,
Mm.
because basically that's looking at how am I doing in all of these areas. And so, yeah, at work, he's a 9, but overall he's like a 3, right? And so being able to tap into how am I doing in all these domains in my life, super important, because you can't manage what you don't measure. So
Yeah.
being able to look at how am I doing in these different domains and understanding whether I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, because that's what was happening there. He was taking resources from these other areas and funding his occupational stress with them. But the thing I had to help him with is he has occupational at a 9 right now, but as he deals with the consequences of those other low numbers, that 9's going to start to drop and he's going to bottom out across the scale. And that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. Well, and as a marriage coach with the couples, you would see how this would manifest it in marriage. And really, there's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
two arms to burnout in marriage, right? It could be burnout happening in some of those other areas, whether it's occupationally, or maybe it's taking care of an elderly parent, or in some way that then affects the marriage, or maybe it's stress from within the marriage. So, can you talk about the without and within? Because it kind of
Yeah.
ends up manifesting in marriage the same
Mhm.
way.
Yeah, so exactly. So there's a difference between being married and burned out by my marriage. Those are
Yes.
2 different things. And so
Yes.
to be married and burned out means something else in my life is going on that has exhausted me of energy. I'm dealing with that emotional and physical breakdown that's happening. And when I'm not able to give my full self to my marriage because I'm not functioning as I normally would, and that's difficult. Not only is that hard on a marriage, anybody who's been through it will tell you it's very hard on a marriage, but secondly, burnout is profoundly contagious, and we know that now from research. So the chances that your spouse will get burnout from you is pretty good. And so there's some reasons why it's really important not to just assume that burnout is a work problem. And sometimes this happens when you're coaching a couple. You'll have a little bit of sensitivity on the individual who's burned out because they're trying to spare their spouse from their work stress. Maybe this is a police officer, maybe maybe this is an emergency room physician, and they don't want to burden their spouse with their stress. So they try to have a firewall between their work stress and their marriage. But what they don't often understand is how contagious their burnout is. It is impacting their spouse. And so we can't keep that firewall up. It's just not possible. That's different from being burned out by my marriage, which is absolutely possible. So burnout can happen in any stressful arena of your life, and marriage counts. I mean, marriage is one of the more stressful arenas. Even in a healthy marriage, there's challenges that you're facing all the time. About just, I mean, parenting, for instance, that's the hardest job any of us are going to do,
Yes.
and all of those things, especially. But think about this blended marriage. You want to talk about the burnout of dealing with a vindictive ex-spouse. I mean, there's just so many things that can happen in a marriage. And unfortunately, if we look at the progression of burnout, the traditional progression is this. I recognize that I am emotionally exhausted. By the way, this comes from Dr. Christina Maslach. I want to give her credit. This is her model. I'm emotionally exhausted, meaning I have no more emotion to give you. The emotion tank empty. So I'm struggling to regulate my emotions. I'm struggling to be aware of my own emotions. Sometimes you talk to a burned out person, you're like, are you even aware how angry you are right now?
Yeah.
And they're not, because they're struggling to even just be able to be aware. They don't read your emotions. They're not able to appeal to your emotions. All of that stuff that requires daily emotional energy, they're just out. That happens first, and then after that, there is a withdrawal. We see this pulling away from whatever it is that you're burned out from. So there's a pulling away both from the source of stress, which in this case could be the marriage. So I'm withdrawing from the marriage, and then also a withdrawal from their self. That's also a key part of this. So I'm kind of withdrawing from my best self, and then I'm also withdrawing from them, in this case, the marriage, meaning that there's less intimacy. And I'm not just talking about physical intimacy. There's less of the bond, the connection, the shared specialness that happens in a marriage relationship. There's more of the we're on parallel tracks, we're roommates in the same house kind of thing happening. And then finally, feelings of failure are the third thing. And so we see people feeling like they've really failed. And if you look at that in the domain of marriage, think about this progression. First, I'm exhausted. I have nothing left to give my spouse emotionally. That's bad enough. Then it's like I'm withdrawing from this marriage relationship because I feel that exhaustion. And then finally, I feel like a failure in marriage. And then we have a person coming into our office saying, I've not only have I fallen out of love with this person, I don't even know if I could ever feel the way for them I used to feel. But beyond all of that, I'm thinking we shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. And you start to hear those failure words coming out, right? And that's not to say that every couple who comes in and says something like that is dealing with burnout. But it's really important to tease out. Sometimes it's not that this is a terrible relationship. It's not that this is, I have, and especially women I find are very scared that they won't feel the way they used to feel. I just don't know if I'll ever get those feelings back. But what's happening is if I'm exhausted, my feeler is turned off. My feeler isn't functioning right now. And that's really helpful to know. My feeler can come back. I can start to feel what I used to feel. But I'm going to have to deal with the burnout.
Well, and that is where actually burnout or realizing and recognizing and diagnosis, not exactly the right word, but pinpointing that the problem is burnout, not something else, is actually hopeful and good, because there's something they can do about it. You have a whole kind of a process to help them do that, to rekindle that energy. Can you explain a little bit? Because I just think we need to give our marriage champions hope that when they're talking to somebody or when they're recognizing that there's burnout, first of all, they should read your book, and then they
Oh,
can
you're very
know
kind.
how to be helpful.
Well, I mean, first off, one of the things that I want to do is I want to start by saying, I want to ask you something. If you were to think about the stress you've experienced in your marriage over the last, let's say, year, although depending on their story and what they've told me, I might change that number a little bit, but let's just say over the last year, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning not stressed out at all. I mean, we really have just been floating on a pink cloud. Everything's just been wonderful. And 10 being, we've been as stressed out as I could imagine any married couple being. Where would you put yourself on that? You'd be surprised how many couples, when I ask them that question, will give me an 8. They'll give me an 8 or sometimes even a 9. I very rarely have a couple say 10, but I'll get an 8 or a 9. Usually they won't say 10 because they can imagine some couple more stressed out than them, but they're telling me that they're way on the high side. When that happens, again, I cannot overlook the fact that there are other elements that brought them to my office. That's probably true. But the one thing that I have to understand, if they tell me they're an 8 or a 9, is I have to realize this couple is telling me that they recognize they have been tremendously stressed. And so we cannot surgically remove stress as an issue and just act like it's not there. It's a huge part of what we're dealing with, right? I also am looking for those road signs where I talked about emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and feelings of failure. So if I hear the failure script, and failure scripts can sound a lot like, they can sound very, it's not you, it's me kind of thing. So you can have a person who's feeling failure who's like, they're so working hard to try to restore this relationship. I see all the things they're doing, and I see, and I appreciate it. I just don't think I have the ability to be in this anymore, right? Well, first of all, we have to respect what they're saying, and we have to hear what they're saying and digest that. On the other hand, I recognize those feelings of failure, and I want to ask, when did you start feeling that? When did you go from feeling like I have something to contribute to this relationship and I'll be successful if I contribute to this relationship, to feeling like nothing I do is going to matter, like there's nothing I can do that's going to help? When did that corner turn? Or I might ask them, if they tell me, so I'm listening for those things. Like when somebody says, that's when I felt like I just couldn't bring myself to this relationship anymore, and I started sleeping in a different room and just being completely out of myself. Or they'll say something like, that's when I just disconnected, and I've been disconnected for a long time. If I hear that, I'm going to say, oh, good. Help me understand when that happened. And I'm also going to be doing, as a marriage counselor, one of the things I'm looking for is the timeline of this relationship. What also happened during that period of time?
Yeah.
So when that happened, what else was happening? Especially if they're parents, we know from the research that the parenting path has its own little stress trajectories. So understanding that's part of the complexity of it. Or just, when did you feel like you just didn't have anything left to give? Because you'll hear that, right? They'll say, I fell out of love, or they'll say, I just suddenly just don't feel it anymore. Those sorts of things. That's emotional exhaustion, right? So when did you start to feel that, like the emotions just weren't there anymore, right? And it's important to be able to ask those questions, not roll your eyes mentally at that and go, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about, when did you start feeling no emotion? Well, actually, that's super, super important, because emotion is the currency that keeps relationships healthy, our ability to manage it healthily and to engage it healthily. And so if the emotion has become dysfunctional, we can either avoid that or we can step into it. And stepping into it is probably our best bet.
And what does stepping into it look like? You talk about injecting energy.
Yeah, injecting energy and stepping into emotion, I would think of as two different kinds of intervention. So
Okay.
for me, stepping into emotion is, for me, that's a very early triage thing. Because when people walk into your office, they have very raw emotion. They're very nervous about whether they can share it. And they're also used to people trying to fix it.
Uh-huh.
They're used to, whenever I share an emotion, somebody either tells me not to feel that way or they try to fix it for me. So stepping into someone's emotion with them, for me, it's about proving that I can sit with something instead of trying to solve it. Most people try to solve emotion, and emotion is generally not solvable. My job is to sit with the emotion. Oh, okay. So I'll give you this silly example. I was working with a couple some years ago. And when I just recently had a change of job, and so I'm not working with couples now, but for the 15 years I worked with couples, I would often have swivel chairs for my couples so they could face each other. I didn't really want them facing me as much as I wanted them facing each other, because we would do a lot of practice conversations where I would help them through conversations to create new communication structures. But in this one session, things were going really well, I thought. I'm listening to this conversation. We're working through this conversation dynamic. She's like, you know what? The truth is, you've never shown me that you love me. In 25 years, you've never shown me that you love me, right?
Wow.
And he looks at me and like with bewildered look, and then he looks back at her. And of course, the first two words out of his mouth is, that's ridiculous. I could show you all these different things that I've done, all these different ways that I've shown you that I love you, right? And of course, I stop him. That's the most benevolent thing that I can do, is stop him. Because the moment he said that's ridiculous, one of two things is happening.
She's done.
Either she's getting mad, the more she's talking, the more mad she's getting, or she just disconnected and she's gone. And so what I did is I said, all right, here's what I want you to do. And this is an intervention I love to use. This is a stepping into the emotion intervention with spouse in the room. So this is kind of a 3D chess kind of thing. But I'm saying to him, okay, let's think about what we heard her say. We heard her say that, you guys have been parents for a long time. Suddenly you're empty nesters. You're more successful in your career than you've ever been. She's been a stay-at-home mom. Now she's trying to figure out, what is her life going to be? She doesn't know what her role is, who she is, trying to figure all of that out. You keep telling her just to get a job if she wants to, but she doesn't even know what she's qualified for. You're traveling, 4 out of 7 days a week. When you're home, you're not having sex. She's wondering what's happening when he's on the road. You guys are barely talking when you are home. And she's wondering, like, is there even a marriage at this point? And I'm like, she's feeling alone. She said she's feeling lonely. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to start a sentence with this. If I felt the way you just said that you feel, and then finish the sentence. And I'm hoping he can do this, right? And he looks at her and he says, if I felt the way you just said that you feel, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I don't think I would be able to do what I wouldn't be able to do anything. And suddenly a tear's coming down her eye, and she said, he heard me for the first time. Well, what just happened? He stepped into that emotion with her instead of arguing about whether the emotion was legitimate. And I see that way too often in inexperienced counselors, arguing about whether the emotion is legitimate, arguing about whether you should feel that, trying to fix it, trying to redirect it. Instead of doing that, it's the ability to enter into it and sit with somebody and say, I can acknowledge how you feel. I can hear that you feel that way. And we can sit with this for a minute, and we can be here together as you feel this way. And then as time progresses, we'll figure something out. But right now, I need you to know that I'm acknowledging that what you're feeling is real, and we'll sort it. So to me, that's stepping into emotion. Building energy into the relationship is like a practical intervention. That's like, okay, you're out of energy. What are we going to do to inject some positive energy into the relationship? There's so many different things that can do that. And so the part about doing energy is finding out what energized them before, because what energizes you as a marriage coach and your spouse is probably different than what energizes your client. So don't try to give them your energy strategy. Try to figure out what works for them. It used to work. They wouldn't have gotten married if they didn't have some kind of energizing structure. Find out what worked for them, and then help them plan something that will work for them now. Just baby steps. Don't give them the whole world in one shot. Baby steps. Hey, try that one thing this week. Come back next week. We'll see how it went, and we'll make little adjustments. So those are kind of, when I'm thinking about those two interventions, that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you really explained that addressing the emotion, because too, when you walked us through that so beautifully, you also have kind of a question like that. That's one of the key questions in Fight Proof Your Marriage that you use. So can you describe how you use that? Because that's a lovely book. And you have also offered that.
Yes.
You have a link at no charge. So you've generously been allowed our marriage champions to have access to that.
Absolutely.
So
yep. Feel free to distribute it to the couples that you work with as coaches. Feel free to distribute as widely as you want. So yeah, helping couples have those kinds of aha moments, light bulb moments. It's harder when they're away from you. Hopefully those light bulb moments happen when they're in your office, but you have to give them some skills to chase down those insights when they're not with you. And one of the things that I've learned to do is teach couples to ask the question, what is it about this that bothers you so much?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, what often happens is if you ask somebody about their fight, tell me about this fight, they will tell you what the fight is about. This happened because I didn't do this, or because they said that I said this, or whatever. I call that the content vortex. We get stuck in the content. And for one thing, generally speaking, they won't even agree about how it happened, because we don't remember. I mean, psychology science tells us it's normal for us to not remember something the same way the other person remembers it. Now we're in this fight about who's correct, and truthfully, we're probably both wrong on some of the details. So that content vortex and sorting out all the details of what happened is totally pointless. It's so much more important to get to, why does this bother them?
Yeah.
What is the motivation that pushes the upset up? And so the question I like to ask is, what is it about this that bothers you so much? And then this is a great off-ramp for an argument, right? All arguments are a complete waste of time. So a way to do this is to say, suppose you're right. What is it about that bothers you so much? I'm not saying you are right, but I'm saying I'll go there with you. You're saying this is how it was. I'll go there with you. I still want to know, why does that bother you? And again, the tone with which I ask this is so important. Because I'm like, well, what is it about that bothers you so much, right?
That's not going to work.
That doesn't work, right? It has to be genuine. It has to be genuine. I really have to be ready to learn about what is it about this that bothers them. But if I am, those aha moments, those light bulb moments, they can happen. They absolutely do happen. And here's why. If we get to what is underneath the content, if they're a good person, and I'm assuming they are, if they're a good person, there will be something I can identify with, right? So let's say that you're out with your spouse and you say something at dinner with your friends, and you thought something was kind of funny, but your spouse took it as sort of a dig at them, right? And so you're in the car and you're having this conversation with them, and they're trying to prove to you that you just aren't, what you said was a dig, and you're like, no, it wasn't. And you're getting into this fight with each other, right? A key point here is understanding what's underneath that. So maybe we spend some time getting underneath that, and they finally say, it's hard for me when I feel like you see me as less than. Well, when that happens, there's going to be a part of my heart that goes, ooh, I don't like feeling less than either. And finally, there's something we can be on the same page about. I find most couples, I cannot get them on the same page about the details, but I can get them on the same page about the motivations. We want good things for our kids. We want to do good things for each other. We want to be honorable people of character. We want to, so all those things are things that we can eventually end up back at, that we can eventually hug it out and say, we might not see exactly the details of it the same way, but at least we can be on the same page about why this became a thing.
Yeah, that is just it was such a light bulb to get to understand that and how that would do. And then too, one of the other things that you stress with the people that you coach is time. If you want your marriage to be leftovers, that's what you give talk about that. Cause you also plan many events for your church that offer time for the couples and to support.
We do. When I started working with people who are going through burnout, mostly pastors, we would take a piece of paper and write 24 hours up at the top of the piece of paper. And then we would subtract their regular obligations, the things that you have to do on a regular basis, from that, and put the number of hours it should take. And almost without fail, we would be roughly between 2 and 5 hours in a deficit situation, meaning that we are obligated to 26 to 29, somewhere in there, hours in a day. And that was before we got to spouse and before we got to God. Yeah. So if God and my spouse are the most important things in my life, what's sad is for a lot of us, we're already overcommitted. We're already in a deficit situation before we even get to our spouse or God. And then we're surprised when it seems like our marriage is starving for attention, and where our relationship with God isn't all that good. So I've said this before, like you were saying, if you want your marriage to feel cold and like leftovers, feed it leftovers. And that's what a lot of people do. But if you want your marriage to be hot and on the front burner, you have to feed it first.
Oh, that is so good. And you have many ways at your church that you've got, you were one of the first, in fact, for the pre-married couples to offer Symbis. And then
we
you
had
have
23 couples at our last Symbis event. And so
how many?
23.
Oh, that's so exciting. Can you explain, because I know you're friends with the parents. Can you explain what Symbis is?
Yeah. So Symbis stands for Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. It started with a best-selling book that the parents wrote some time ago. And then over the years, they've developed supplemental resources for it. So they started with VHS tapes that they had for it, and then DVDs, but eventually, Les and his team built this incredibly full-featured web-based assessment that couples can take before they get married, or actually they can take it after they get married for enrichment purposes. And they get this wonderful report. And when we do our premarital, we'll have, and we do it different. Everybody does a little different, but we have all these couples together, and we have table leaders who are at their tables, and we go through those reports that they get from their analysis. Super helpful. We also have a couple other things we do that we love. We do Married Life Live every quarter. Married Life Live we call it a date night with a purpose. It's a 1 hour thing on a Friday night that we pack full. We plan it, every minute of it. We plan ahead of time. There's incredible games. We have our worship team is there doing some awesome music that's relevant to the topic. We do a short sort of TED Talk timed talk that's part of it. So our couples have really come to love and enjoy that. We do that once a quarter. And then we do our annual marriage retreat, which is a huge event for us. And we're still trying to figure out how to move the needle even farther. What can we do to help marriages proactively? Because the reactive ministries have to be there, counseling, coaching, all of that. But the church has to get better at being proactive about helping marriages stay strong. And that's definitely a focus for us right now.
Oh, I love it. That sounds like so much fun. And I'm also so glad that you brought up the reactive, because you do have another program that you helped create for grief and as you said, that, I mean, grief and stress, I mean, that could, I lost my father this fall, and that can create a burnout reaction that falls out to marriage. To talk about that, it's called Through This Valley,
Through this
right?
valley. Grief is one of the hardest things your marriage will ever go through. The grief of someone in your near family, and there are even folks who you will minister to who have what we call out of order grief, meaning that a parent buries a child, or you have someone who has a spouse who's young who dies, and when that happens, it is traumatic. It's absolutely traumatic, but it can be traumatic to lose a parent, even though that's not out of order grief. That can be traumatic. And so, yes, getting help is really important. And so one of the things that we've done is we've created this curriculum, and we interviewed psychiatrists, psychologists, pastors, people who've been through grief. We had 50, 60 hours of film, and we reduced it to 8 30-minute segments. And there's a workbook and small group guides, and all that's completely free for use. So if you have somebody who's a marriage champion who's watching this, and you're like, hey, I'd like to do a grief group for married couples who are experiencing grief, yeah, the curriculum's already there. It's available for you to use. You can email us and we'll give you a host account. You don't have to pay or anything for it, but it gets you all the access to all the downloads and everything. And we will definitely help get you on your way doing that kind of work.
Oh, that is so generous of you, Jonathan. That is, I can just imagine how many people are going to benefit from that, and taking care of that step, and then they can start some of the other things that you've recommended, and maybe even avoid burnout by dealing
Yes,
with their grief up front.
that's the
So,
goal. That's the goal.
oh, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. It's just such a pleasure.
It's my joy. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, Marriage Champions, if you'd like to learn more about Jonathan Hoover and his resources, you can always find us at marriageresources.org or marriageinitiative.org.